Shuhei Yoshida's most recent interview was actually conducted with Colin Moriarty at The Last Stand Media. The Last Stand Media hosts a PlayStation podcast, and this is actually behind a paywall. I actually went ahead and accessed it, got the Patreon subscription and all, but since it's behind a paywall and out of respect, I cannot show or I refuse to show any of the video clips that's not already made available. However, I can talk about some of the topics because, again, it's what I saw there. And I encourage you to actually go ahead, if you choose to, to watch this particular interview. There was something very interesting in one of the questions that Colin asked to Shuhei Yoshida during the course of this particular interview. He asked them and said something along the lines of, if investors actually do care, or if PlayStation is that concerned about the first party compared to third party games, and what is basically the amount of dependence they have on this particular thing. Now, somehow Shuhei said he had not taken a look at some of the data sets, and it didn't necessarily seem like something he wanted to talk about. So I looked and I was thinking to myself, I wonder why that question was not dived into much deeper. Because in my opinion, I think something of note is worth looking at here. PlayStation has shipped 75 million, consoles. And then when we look very carefully at its, software sales in Q4, or I guess the time ending December 2024, we realize that its first party sales were actually down 4 million units from the 16 million units that were sold in the previous year, in the previous, period in the previous fiscal year. Now, when you think about it, a lot of third-party software was also sold, and this is basically where a lot of their own money came from in this entire equation. But there's also something that's interesting across the board. This is especially for those who somewhere somehow think that exclusivity is this thing that would drive the console sales. When you take a very close look, shout out to Ireland M5P who put this data set out. Another interview that was also recently conducted by Matt Piscatella of Circana and MPD Research, who posts a lot of data set that shows a lot of player behaviors. He pointed out that the market right now is a very interesting and challenging place for games that are not in the live service category in terms of the top 15 or top 10. In fact, he said that the top 10 games that exist here, Call of Duty, Fortnite, GTA, NBA 2K, and all, pretty much consume 40% of player playtime. Basically, 7 out of 10 people will play these games at almost every given gaming session when you think about it. Some other stats also show that 30% of gamers do not buy games throughout the year. There are a lot of people who play a lot of free-to-play games. 18% of these gamers buy a game every 6 months. Mainly the people who are playing these 2K games and Madden games, they'll buy maybe one or two, of these type of games, and that's all they're going to play. Only 12% of gamers buy a game every month, and only 4% of gamers buy more than one game a month. It's a very small number of gamers that are out there that are fighting to buy these particular games from these publishers. It brings me into the reality, and Xbox sees it and realizes that even if they go ahead and get 75 million consoles sold out of nowhere, you know what I mean? Like, if we wake up tomorrow and we find out that Xbox has sold another 30 million consoles, they will still be in the exact same boat that PlayStation is in, where there's a limited number of gamers who want to buy these games, number one. And number two, the live service mania and games like Fortnite are just pretty much going to propagate more users on their platform. So what do you do when your first party games are actually getting bludgeoned by third party games? Well, you have to be able to find more of these 4% of gamers that will be willing to spend extra money to buy your game and then the other games that they're playing. And once you've exhausted them on your platform, the next frontier is to go find them on other platforms, because they're there, obviously, but you need to be able to find them and get your game to them with accessibility in mind. This is, in my opinion, one of the one of the benefits that Xbox has enjoyed, even though it was out of a market stress that pushed them into selling their games on PC, they've pretty much gone that route. And PlayStation is following very heavily. Very heavily. PlayStation is not going to sit down and do exclusivity, much anymore. They're not. In fact, they're not doing it anymore. When they make a game, they get the 4% that are going to be willing to buy their game and a little bit more, or maybe a little bit, maybe past the 4% and the 12%. How many of them are they? If we actually run the numbers, let's run the numbers all together, right? So 18% will buy a game every 6 months. So basically, they're probably going to go buy it on sale. 12% of those gamers, buy a game every month, and 4% of gamers will buy more than one game. So they have to find a way to convince those 12% and the 18% folk and the 4% and say, hey man, can you all please buy our game? And most of those gamers are going to buy it later down the road when the game has been discounted. Then you have the 30% who basically do nothing else than play Apex Legends and Fortnite and all of the above. So what do? They look and say, well, we know that there's another 4%, another 18, another 12% here on PC, and we're going to go ahead and try to get some money out of it. Them not putting their games on Xbox is also to basically show that, we're sufficient in a way, but they're not self-sufficient, because self-sufficiency would mean that they would not have to put these games on the on the PC platform, which also basically goes to contradict this whole talk that exclusives sell these consoles. They don't. People are just basically, in a sense, keeping their library by continuing an ecosystem, and then they're moving on to play their favorite live service games on these particular consoles all day, every day. To crack into this market, I think where PlayStation was probably going to see some really interesting, changes in its business is that it's going to be much more risk averse. They're not going to take a lot of risks. They're going to make a lot of cookie cutter, games. And it's what they've been doing, actually. The risks that they've taken don't seem to have really panned out because, again, if they're not going with recognizable names, you know what happens? Most of their games are going to basically end up, oh, wow, mostly negative. This game was just on mixed a while ago. I guess this game is probably just not good for people who like, Lego games. I don't know. I don't play Lego games. That's weird. Anyways. Comment section. Thanks so much for watching. Peace out.